exploring. In other words, something happens, and I say I have an argument with someone so intense that it spends hours and hours of what's seemingly nothing. But then I say, okay, it breaks up, but then one goes to sleep hoping that the person isn't hurt or gets sick or dies or something like that. And so then I say, well, what is that? One stuck to the argument, and so you discover again and again in things a kind of remorse we were discussing earlier here. Remorse as a word. You see, remorse as an active principle is I should have done this, I could have done that, I killed that person. So I was experimenting with folks and myself for this element of PTSD, where one is so traumatized over an event that they've experienced that they then, there's lag time in the world, in the literal world, that they come to with a literal language and literal instructions. And when somehow they come from a different premise, depending on the level. But I don't see that the PTSD has gotten rid of it. To me, is also reflective of an event that's happening. And I would say that what is happening, depending on the extremity of the PTSD and the extremity of the situation that one was sent to, I would say what we've been theorizing over the last few weeks was that one runs into their human. And in the literal world, that is usually a screw up, but somehow they've run into something that they think is a psychological disorder or has to be trained or punished or it's cowardly. But somehow when it went from the movie idea of being in the army to the literal idea where it actually had to do it, it ran into its human. In retrospect, it ran into its failure of training in the literal sense. So there was a punishment whenever you came close to a human feeling, because the human feeling would question the status quo. And so then you saw that the status quo is always guarding against human feelings and organizing it into happy and this and that. When a human being released from the literal story has a full range of experiences available to them that are not organized socially. So then we were exploring for myself, because in the last week we had explored certain things like forgetting, which is a device of survival, it seems, in a very relevant way. But then as if you're forgetting something. But then I say, as you deeply explore, where one is no longer bringing the motive, but exploration takes away the motive of survival, and you start to see forgetting from a whole different place, as if it was another expression of yours, like another sense. Looking back at the story, forgetting created forgiveness by releasing the hold on the story. So you see that you were subject to senses in yourself, and they were literalized. The story was frozen, but somehow but it lived on. But then somehow, from a perspective, it doesn't go away, psychologically gotten rid of it, whatever. You see the life you've lived from a different perspective. And you see that there are certain fundamental feelings that run through the parallel life that are troublesome in the everyday life, but are the depth of the parallel life. Because the parallel life doesn't think the story is literally around the story. It thinks around the creative exchange, the feeling exchange, all the dimensions that went into something. And you meet that. And when you meet that for me, I met that in the remorse, a sense of something, that why didn't the people just stop, or what? That's a logical thing. But you saw that there was a direct desire to have a reflective remorse take place at a certain point. I should have, could have, would have. That's the ego's sense of trying to possess it. But you see a different hand written in the story.
Mm.
And it releases the remorse from your ownership. And you see that it was always running through, it was looking for an event to happen. But so we associate the event with the remorse, but okay. But you see, it was inherently in it that there are forces that are running through the life, where to the literal self, that's mysterious thinking, magical thinking, creative thinking, all kinds of non-logical thinking, which one visits in different ways. And you meet the story in a sense where you get a perspective on something. And I think you experience pure feeling, not from ownership, but from having reading it and being touched by the story, where the doer can't do anything around the story, but the inherent neighborhood of the story touches one. Where one couldn't be touched by their own life in that way, a parallel life can reveal the circumstance that runs through it that's not a possessive, that is part of a relationship to more of a mystery life than what we would presume that one is related only to a history life. So you also see a life where the events of one's life is not always literalized.
Yeah.
And when you visit that world, it is very much like visiting the garden or visiting the trees, or it doesn't have to be stylized or whatever, but then you start to see things that interact. And okay, we're gonna want to
You
show
went the wrong way.
you to the rest of the world. Okay. You okay?
I
What do you
swallowed my
say,
tea
Mary?
wrong.
Did you have a sense of what we were just exploring? We did discuss it somewhat. And somewhat, and some of the things, so that's why I said when you mentioned the other day, money, did it look like I needed money or something? I haven't had, yeah. Okay. And I said, who's not having this up and down about money? Money is a force out there. It's like electricity or something, or light or something that somehow you need. So we'll run into, and so you see what is built around the literal money world when it is based on managing through effort, through a job, through work, and this and that, the struggle that becomes normal. But then you say fears, angers, all these things become written into that normalcy. Um, so then there is a moment that you see, hold it, coming from a different place, a job is part of one's life. It is not the ownership of the life. And I say that's a hard thing to experience, really, even though theoretically you can experience it. Even though it happens to be so, the experience of it is different than the idea of it or knowledge of it. And why? I say, because you see that somehow there's an intelligence in living. And jobs was only one of them that had been organized, just like we discovered about sleep. The sleep has been organized in order to be a worker world. But if you're an artist world or an artisan or even a doctor waking up at different hours or whatever, you see that you may have created your own form of sleep. So then you do find that an artisan world, or a world that is not so literally organized in time, then has some creative dimensions of their life. So then we say, okay, when that happens, then one looks at a bit life from a creative perspective, how to keep the purity, your association of creativity with how not to sell out to the fear the literal collective fear to this or that in some way. But then the resistance makes you part of the scene. And let's say inherently, I don't have to resist or not resist or whatever. If I drive past the vaccine thing, is maybe next week or okay. So I found what other people would accuse me of avoidance or this or that, But I've tried to make it as remarkably creative as possible. But if they say, well, what is happening? And I say, well, I'm kind of having a dumb idea that before they want me to take these pills now, that I'm saying to my body and the body's talking to me. And I say, well, what do you think? Do you feel like we can work with this? And I'm actually, and it says, well, and it's kind of saying what I would say also. Well, maybe go and wait a day or two and look at it and see what's happening. We'll say. But then I'm saying, is that avoidance? And I say, well, it's avoidance in the literal world. But somehow it's like saying you talk to your lover about it because you're seeing how it's a major decision for you and how affected they'll be by it. You like their perspective in it. It's not so much around doing something. You're kind of aware of the impact and the perspective of someone. So even it's a strong influence if the kid says, "Mommy, do it." I mean, somehow. So the doing isn't the question; it's where it's coming from.
Mm.
And so our challenge is that we don't seem, the collective we here, don't seem to come from this karmic history. This literally, even though we have had literal parents and literal background, in examining it, you also see it was really fluid what they were going through, the perspective. Okay. And it somewhat frees the story. And somehow each of us have freed the literal story that we've come from and explored something in the world. So it's not so given. So discovery is different than knowing. Knowing about cancer is different than when they tell you have cancer. But then I also read that article that they say that they're worried about, they were pushing early discovery of cancer as being important. Now they say that most cancers just fade away by themselves, and a lot, maybe 60% of them, the body would say goodbye to them in its own way, naturally. And so treating it before it really is a cancer may create a,
Right.
What say, Kai? Do you want to get into the medical world out there? So,
That is definitely not my draw. No.
no, well, let's say I can't condemn and I can't. So then I'm saying, let's say you create a friendly where the guy is going to put tubes in you and he's going to Hawaii tomorrow and he's talking about Hawaii and you're smiling. They say, oh, I remember Hawaii. Yeah. And you're going along with this thing. And it's a friendly conversation while you're in this situation. And then they prescribe you this, and the guy says, okay, I'll come back and see you. But there's something in the way of taking the test of what I would like to see. So somehow, even it's all crazy, I'd like to see my relationship to what's happening inside in perspective and the feelings I have, and if in fact there is some evidence of what's happening there. So it's like a conversation with the inside. And then every year there may be a check. But for me, I'm buying a year at a time. So that's what I mean by conversing with the body. I say, are we up for this? It's 3 days of this thing. I'll get rid of the infection, which is a major concern for those because enough of our friends have passed away, not from major things, but sepsis, a traveling infection or inflammation in the body. And so so much of it has a lupus element, but the lupus meaning that the immune system is kind of misreading and overreacting seemingly, and somehow you're trying to restore balance to that. That's some of the premises of it. Because in fact, most of the time, going to the doctor is like going to well, I haven't been to a real doctor literally for a checkup, or even though there's a friend available who also does end of life help and stuff like that. A sweetheart, but I haven't had him examined. He's examined Janet before. But I haven't had really gone to a doctor for a checkup. It's only this guy with the bladder cancer. He doesn't do anything else. But the question is that every year you have to see if it's recurred. It seems to come back. So that's one of the things about buying a year or this or time or whatever. So when there's a recurrence, and I'm kind of putting aside the whatever pain or process, I'm recognizing something that's happening. But also during that month of May, there was also something that was happening in our life, or in the energy. There were people visiting town, and situations were there that I felt in my place was to just be there for, you know. And so then treatment that it would not be proper in the circumstance, because being there, I feel, is inherent in the. So I discover a sense what remorse means, and that sometimes people, even though it seems dumb, will push and fight until there would be remorse. In time, there would be remorse. And so then when the argument seems so stupid, you understand why it was stupid. It wasn't about anything. It was to create a kind of memory, but not as a possessive, not doing something about. But then there may be a moment when one does something about the remorse that comes to them. And that means that they transmit somehow a feeling. And so then, with that, Kai, I was kind of looking at your circumstance, and I felt when there is remorse in the story, then you experience Shaktipat as you experience different, like the remorse is like a sense of one's life story. And you see it in the creative sense, how important an experience it is, but it's almost pure. Anger, remembering, getting even, spite, all these other elements trickle off. But when it starts to reach remorse, it starts to reach non-ownership of the story, but a pure state, or a pure state, meaning that the story is not owned by history. And so on different levels, depending on what chakra I think is awakened, doing something about it, correcting it, entering back into the story, but remorse felt. I felt then I discovered that there's an element in the life that I'm living of being there for something in each relationship, of it being there. Did that literally mean being in death? But when the feeling was broken by something, then what was taken for granted then came about more by a hey baby conversation. Are we still into this? So you'll see then events will happen that indicate that somehow it became habit, the circumstance. Instead of becoming a creative act, it's become habitual. And so you understand sometimes the avoidance of the hey baby conversation, that we're sharing an experience. And each one is assuming the role, but it's affection that allows us to share the experience. Then you assume the role. But if you take away the affection and you have the role, I think I'll catch you later then. So somehow a feeling created the roles. Then somehow you see the feelings become literalized, or the role becomes literalized. And that means you shut up about the feeling part of it, or it diminishes. And you see things happen, life and death movements happening in your life and in your body and circumstance. And somehow you get a perspective that the outer life and your inner life and your body and your being are one movement in some way. And I feel that in getting a peep of it creatively, it shifts the story somewhat from the ownership, from the literal. And you see that there's something automatically that happens in what you practice, you run into. Hmm? If you are a nurse or a doctor caring for a certain thing, you may run into that very thing yourself or in your family or whatever. And somehow, without overbearing, there is a simultaneity taking place. Hmm? And I feel that we're, so then again, when I see, okay, there's a treatment around something that I've been kind of knowing has been there and I've put aside for a while, but then I was released from that story. So then we did go there, and it took them a week to find out something while I gave you something else. And so then I enter into a literal world there where they're not treating you at all or something like that, where they're treating what people in your, to shut up and go away and take the pain away or whatever with a straight face or whatever. Okay. So then again, yeah, you then ask the body and the circumstance, yeah. And here they say, okay, we'll make you the juice and then we'll make some cranberry juice to offset the effect of the, okay, and we're working, so that, or probiotics or, so let's say that all that means is that you're kind of aware of what's happening in the body and you understand there's a period of management that is actually happening anyway, but you're aware of. So it's not only coming to you as pain or this or that, it's coming to you also as what is happening with it. So somehow these things are, from this perspective, what would have been forgetfulness, all of these things would have been challenging formats, became not letting one off the hook, but one being even deeper on the hook, where you saw that forgetting from the author's perspective was not a way of avoiding a story. It was a way of releasing the story from one's memory, from one's ownership. So then there was something in being the author that kind of brought a purity to the story that wouldn't hide behind this and that. And you got to see something that, seen from a different perspective, saw that there was an energy running through your life always. And that there have been different phases of the experience as you assume a form, as you assume a body. There are biological, scientific, artistic, creative functions and structures, an amazing thing. The body shaping and forming towards different expression, naturally built into, take it for granted. The attempt to know it, correct it, fix it. You step into a world. And when I step into that world, do I go to the shaman guy who charges a lot? Or should I go to the friend doctor who doesn't? Okay. So then I say, as you're navigating, the feeling, the friendship is there, and then the expression is there. That somehow is a friend who happens to be a doctor. It's a friend who happens to be a shaman. So to me, the friendship is the medium, and then the expression is there. And I feel in the friendship, it gives integrity to the medium. And they say, why? Because most mediums have to earn a buck and are out in the world. But in friendship, there's a shared space. If they needed a bit more, you can try to get it for them. If they need, it's fluid. It's not the payment that structures it. So I said, well, what for me then, that level, especially on the level where the person sees an emergency room as their job, and then comes to see you in person or something like that, and yet they saw 100 people that day with this and that, who was screaming, what the hell's going on there? And somehow you have a philosophical question and reflection on there, and you happen to get something of an examination with it, you know. So I say, that's okay. I can go for that. Not that I need it or I have to call on it, but basically, it does have the romantic notion to it that somehow the friendly would adjust the scientific mind to a degree where it's not so literal. So having the friendship, you would be on a similar feeling. When the science is introduced from a human point of view, from an art point of view, from a perspective that there's no contradiction in the, you see that they're all tools of science: accident, mistake, screw up life. And then there's the logical learning towards an experience. But then there are those who somehow make breakthroughs, who out with the logical education, quit in time, go out, have experiences in different places, come back to it, where it's not literalized in education being that, but education being a natural living process, where the literal education is part of it. But literal education is like, should we take a walk in the woods? Because there's an experience in the woods that you share. And so the literal education may be that you have an interest in something and then you may need to literally explore it. We have that now, actually, and we have been having that. While we have been having our own lives all this time, we've in fact had a creative life that we've normalized. And if in fact we are hanging with situations that are tough, it's creatively tough. And that's what I'm saying, the exploration, not only of forgetting, because it sort of actualizes the story from a different place, but remorse. Why did we hold on to this fight so long when it was obvious? And then you would then worry if the person would get hurt because of the argument, or they would do this. So let's say small and large. What do the remorse? Do they feel the remorse when they ordered the killing of thousands of people and this and that? Can they really get away with the explanation that it's the czar and it's a past empire? Are you kidding? Look at that old lady. And so they're trying to rub the old lady in your face, and he's talking shit from the 18th century. Is that guy going to feel remorse one day? And so they try to have him feel remorse by going after his daughters or something like that. So then he'll wake up. So can you, the engineered remorse, possessed by the psyche, by the storyline. But you see throughout the story, in every form, there's even the child growing up saying, "I'm sorry, mommy, I didn't mean it." And we saw that dopey show. Did you see that show, Urja? Better Things?
Yes.
There's a show called Better Things, and I think it was season 2, episode 6. I saw, I conveyed to Urja. And it was that she makes movies and she teaches classes in acting and so on. But then in the story, she's there and with her 3 kids, the daughters and the old husband and a couple of other people. And she says, "I'm sick of this. I want recognition now. I've been looking out for you and I've been doing this for you all these years, and you've been acting just this way with me. You don't even ask how I'm doing. You never even looked at my movies or my shows or anything." And the other one, and I said, "Come on, Ma, stop being a drama queen." And the other one, and they go like that in the room. And then I think the ex-father or something, he said, so then she comes back into the room and takes the youngest daughter who's crying. He says, "You're making me feel bad, Mommy." He says, "Look, you and me are dead. We died in a car accident. Let's lay down here." And the other said, "Oh, come on, stop!" And they lie down there. But at the end of the movie, so then one, I'm sorry if this is tedious, but there was the one teenage daughter said, where she had to speak to her mother as if she was dying, and she said, "Loser." She yelled at her, and that broke her heart, and so on like that. So then they staged a reel. They were dying, and then the daughters and everybody gave. And she says, "My mom was so sweet. She was the greatest ever," or whatever. And but it made everyone flip a little bit. But it was also reflected somehow some of the things that we were talking about the day before. Why did they argue so strong, these people that we know ourselves? Why were they fighting so strong? And this kind of show seemed to reveal a lot of this whole thing. And I've been exploring again that word. And hmm? Yeah, the remorse. And you see how it runs in many ways. But once you see it, it's not separate from you. And I'm saying that it becomes like a sense of smell. It's there when something, that it has a similarity. You run into some smell, and you see what it is. You can detect what it is. You see somehow this whole cooperation, or you explore further what it is. But then, as you're exploring deep sentiments that run through the everyday story, and that everyone was involved. At the same time, they surrendered themselves for the story, just like they surrendered themselves to make the movie. Each of them went home to our life. But in order to have the movie, each of them had to hide their everyday life in order to share a creative act. Okay.
That's really wonderful. It's like the exploration revealed the subtlety that you don't see if you don't get.
You do see it. Let's say if you're making the film,
Yeah.
then you do see that you are creating remorse. It is created by the script, by the director. They're creating things, but it's not remorse. Remorse is the name of something that has many dimensions to it.
Yeah.
So on one level, remorse is that I could have done something. So doing is one aspect of remorse. I could have done something, and you say you did something. You avoided looking like you avoided. That's one aspect of it. And I say, well, what is the other aspect of it? I say you're creating an experience by what looks like the avoidance. Because avoidance couldn't happen unless there was a touch of remorse in it. So as avoidance becomes a reality, what you call avoidance reality, creatively, it's creating a moment. And I said, can one envision their life from that creative perspective when we're living in a reality? And I said, one, of course, is living in a reality. And when you visit the reality, you see the multidimensional aspect of it, of the normal. And you see then that you are flooding your day and flooding your circumstance with thought, with structure, with interaction, with so the everyday being nothing, doing nothing, the nothingness has dimensions to it. But you all understand that somehow the interactions of folks has inherent remorse in the action. Not to get out of it, not even no matter how much one tried to get out of it, somehow with certain friends or certain relationships, it had to fight. Where anyone could have said, "What are you guys doing? You're supposed to be this and that. You're fighting over a music thing or a sound or whatever." You kind of supposedly disturb the whole idea of music by having a fight over it. And yet you see how relentlessly it was done. And then you see, holy shit, that's how, so a remorse comes, depending on the level. And it introduces you to a world that is coexisting. Now, some of those worlds may say, I'm sorry, mommy, I'm sorry, you can't this and that. I said, because you see how kind of it was written into the story knowingly. But so you visit your existence from another place where the remorse is not only owned by a doer, but the remorse opens up a doorway that was hidden in plain sight. Now, is this remorse there? Well, they try to force remorse and to a dictator that's arrested or a killer or this or that. They treat my experience in the last week was more around people who then had terrible experiences, so that it was PTSD that was in the picture, and I saw that the PTSD treatment was around remorse. In the military and things, of course, there's remorse, and it's soulful remorse. And so the idea of treatment or doing something about it or getting rid of it, when in fact the thing is happening. Okay. So I said, this is what, when I first met the remorse, it was more around the PTSD. And then it was also had many of the military connotations, and you see how they're smoking pot or getting therapy around it. And I remember those experiences there, and where somehow in secret it was normal with the situation you're in. And then they made it like it was an illness that you had, when in fact you had a human feeling about something that you were involved in. You know what I mean? And then they were treating you. You can be treated for all kinds of things then. And you say, oh, you guys are trying to make me cop out to a very shitty scene. You know, and you're making like insanity in this level and that level. But it was really cheesy scene. And I think, man, you know how many years it takes you to discover that conversation? And do you realize that you could be treated all those years for having seen something purely, but then only when there's a moment of perception in relationship to it, do you visit another life that you've lived? Not only you life, but a life of you stepping into experience, to have the experience of being a person, to somehow step into the story and to have a life experience as a human being. And you see that somehow your one capacity was creatively some interaction creatively that opened up creative doorways and took. So then you start to visit much of the life, what they would call fantasy and a literalization of it. You start to see it has, from the literal life, it has fantasy moments, but falling in love and doing this and making a plan and creating that, they're making it literal, but it also comes from a feeling that opens up a doorway. But you find the multi-dimension of your life. And you also see when you discover it somehow, your very existence starts to teach it or share it. And when your life is a shared expression, then you run into money as they do in the dry, if you open up a dry cleaner or a vegetable shop or whatever you did, or a fragrance shop, rent or something like that. So it literalizes the event that was more kind of magical for you, an expression, a real interest in something, and then it's giving you an expression. That challenge is, in fact, a dialogue that is happening between the creative and the literal, where my being born may have been a creative act, but then the raising is the literalization of that moment. And then as the moment literalizes, it divides to some degree. You said this, I did that. But it had an experience where it was one movement, one feeling. I feel that one has come into the story from that perspective, that it is almost, your life has been almost around experiences. And that the actual situations that each of them of us have resemble each other to some degree, because the world is in flux. So, um, me talking to my body, okay, should we try this or that, and then I think tomorrow, well, Friday, I'm invited to, you know, the fellow who made the movie Kayana Squati years ago, Jeffrey. Well, we're invited to sit on the couch together and watch his new movie up there.
Oh, nice.
Gee, what's his name? I forget his name. Godfrey, Jeffrey. What was it again? Godfrey, you got that. But he's made quite a few movies, and he is a movie that when you see it, you see, he said. When you see his movies, and I think his latest one is Only Faces. He says, but the Kayana Squati was also, I think, from the Hopi perspective of seeing life in the film. So but he had Philip Glass in many of the movies playing with him. So the movies are more of an immersive.
Yeah.
And so some fellow said that, he got us some tickets to sit together and watch the new film before it comes out. So we're invited to do that on Friday. We'll see if that happens. Do you know who it is, Derek?
I don't.
No, huh? You've not heard of Kayana Squati before.
I haven't.
That's a Hopi word. Oh, he's made about 10 movies now, really important ones, so they say. If he's gotten the people backing him up, that he's got now. Reggio. Godfrey Reggio? No. Well, we can't remember his name. We'll tell you about the film if we see it.
Yes. Yeah. I want the report.
It's really funny that, no, he's pretty famous, and he's got, in the movie world, and his way of seeing things and his philosophies. But then I was listening to his interview that he had, and the premise was seeing. That in the film you saw something that kind of awakened a sense. So he said, wherever you took that, that was yours to take. But somehow in the seeing, something happened in the films.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool.
And so some of them, I think, are just flying over situations or whatever. Some of them, maybe, I think one is about workers and, stuff like that, but then seeing it from that place. So, is it Godfrey Reggio, man?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, it may be Godfrey Reggio. Yeah, she'll see if she could find it. But you may be able to find or hear about his things.
It's an interesting Godfrey sound British and then Reggio sound Italian.
Do you have any computer stuff there at all? Yeah, you do computer, don't you?
You could talk in me?
No, I'm talking to Kai. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean by computer stuff?
Well, I mean, you do searches and stuff like that. Yeah, you do have conversations and stuff online, right? So you are you know it pretty well how to do it, streaming and all that. Do you watch?
I know what I do. I know how to do what I do.
Yeah, that's what I also know what I do also. So I think that's what everyone we know here is they know what they do. No one knows. Sometimes you meet someone who knows the whole thing from everything, but basically.
Tico just got hired by his music school to be, well, for the director to be the IT guy for him. So.
Oh, that's great. Then.
Unschooled, taught himself computer, now has a job at 15.
Yeah,
he didn't even look for it. They just offered it to him.
That's great. And so is he happy with that?
Yeah, because he loves that. It's his guitar teacher too, and he loves him. So he'll basically be his assistant.
No, that's great. I think you're okay. You're okay. Hang with it. Let's see where it takes us in the next. I'm asking my body, hang with it. We'll hang out. I just want to be there. But are we okay, everyone?
Yes. Thank you, Danny.
Should we continue kind of this get together and see how it's going?
Of
But
course.
for me, again, the weirdness of it is this. a word that would be tough to have, remorse, then starts to become a word that is not a word, but opens up a whole thing that's inherently, it's like there are certain nerves and elements in the body that are built for remorse. There's a certain part of your brain that has different levels of remorse elements in it. And you see that somehow part of you is in it for the experience of what it means to be a human being, what it means to have this experience of being alive. But something, some energy that one has a nuance or a sense of, or intuition of, or tries to learn about, or mantras, or to locate it, that there's a parallel energy that when discovered looks like a parallel life is being lived, that somehow you intuited, but you discover. And so in that, when you see a parallel life being lived, you start to see the experiences in the parallel life, in the, we'll call it the spiritual creative life, are more soulful. But the experience in the literal life are personal. So it's somehow when the literal acts on the literal hurt that it has, but it runs into a soulful aspect of it that releases the story. And you see it runs in through it when real elements start to enter into the story. Like, what does it really mean, remorse? You see it play out in different ways. I should have, could have, but then you see it not owned by the psyche. And you see it's a force that runs through the life. And when it comes to looking at it, you then reach a soulful dimension of the very thing that was psychological and literal on one surface. And you meet the energy. And that feeling when you meet the energy, it's like you meet the letter writer of the story, one who's writing the story to some degree. You see it to some degree from a different place. And it interrupts the literal. Somehow being there for it is not laid out what that means, but somehow you're being there for something. So you can laugh and says, yeah, he's gonna be the guitar teacher. Okay, hey, and he's in the paper. Okay, you can have that experience. And
I love my kids.
I understand. So you can have that experience. It's gonna be the guitar teacher. And I say, I can see your kids, and I'm reminding you while you're hanging out. So you see how creative it is to watch them. So to some extent, it shifted to not ownership of them, but seeing something happen for you, where you see creative is not owned by anyone. You see a process going down. And somehow you see your presence kept something together when together was necessary. And it's soulful, what you do. It's not owned by psychology or this or that, but somehow presence, being there, is that somehow being there where most of us aren't, but being there is to see something that is usually avoided, usually not seen in the life. But you see the process is going down. And I think that you'll do kind of forever young, okay? Let's say you'll stop, even 30 years from now, you'll be this picture right here, okay? So somehow in being true to something that you're present for, I think that kind of emanates in you. And do you want the job? Not only do you have the job, but do you see the creative process happening in the everyday, or the soulful process happening?
Yes.
And then the everyday. So yeah, that's who it is. So it is Godfrey Reggio. And he's my age too, or he's Urja's age. But he's got 100 movies. Kayana Squatchy, what is this last one? He's got, do you see what they are? Yeah, but check it out. And Derek, see what you
And
think.
Kowalski,
what?
Hmm?
something Kowalski,
Yeah.
visitors,
Visitors,
Anima Mundi,
Anima Mundi,
Oh,
Awaken,
Awaken.
Evidence.
Yeah, so what's the one? I'll see what Spiro.
Reed said life out of balance.
Life Out of Balance. That was pretty big, that one.
Music by Philip Glass.
Yeah.
Shot 16 millimeter.
When they joined. So then his movies become an immersive of sorts. And the immersive meaning simply seeing that you had an experience, and you come out. That's what I think he was saying. So we'll see how that comes off on Friday, if it works out or not. If we have an argument about something, okay. What do you think, Urja? You want to fly in and go?
go. Oh, Danny.
Nah, I'm just kidding you now.
That would be lovely.
You okay then, Kai?
Yes.
Yeah. Derek, everything okay? Manageable?
All is well.
Bitcoin is. Huh?
Yeah. Looks pretty ugly out there.
It does seem everywhere. What do you think? Well, it just again seems up in the air,
Yeah.
and but you also see now. Once you see remorse, you see remorse running all over them. How could they do these things without there being remorse? And then to their own families of people and situations or whatever like that, their angers. So you kind of see how built in, and then you see the PTSD. What is it? Something blocks you from seeing that you killed a kid. Okay. And you think the PTSD is bad or something when that's the one pure thing in you, keeping you from the horror show so that you can examine it. So they're trying to make it look like it was normal what you did. They don't say, please forgive us for ordering you to do this. They made it sound normal, like they ordered you to do this. Okay. So then there is a time when they say, oh, we ordered these young people to do this. I'll see you all. Take care.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Danny.
Danny. Bye, everybody.
Bye.